We got an email from John last week asking about our thoughts on progressive theism. Now, normally we address stuff like this at the end of the show, but I think it represents such a divisive point amongst some atheists that it deserves special attention. And I'm going to go through the email in a bit of detail here because I think it allows me to make an important point from a number of different directions. So first, for background, John is a relatively new listener, and that'll be obvious fairly early in the email. He found us through God Awful Movies, and he just started listening to some of the archived episodes of the show. He writes in part, quote, "As easy targets as the more orthodox and conservative religious nutballs are for you guys, I don't think I've ever picked up on your thoughts on more progressive sects and movements. Are organizations like the Unitarian Universalists and Episcopalians, quote-unquote, better, in your opinion, because they promote equality and social justice in contrast to their conservative counterparts, or does the fact that they buy into the existence of sky people still bother you?" Now, I want to cut in and point out the obvious false dichotomy here. Clearly, one can answer yes to both of those questions, so there's really no need for an or there. So, yes, people who actively promote bigotry are worse than people who don't, and yes, the people who believe in sky people bother me one way or the other. Anyway, back to the email. I guess what I'm asking is, if there were people who agreed with you on all the other things except the existence of God, would you still berate them for it, or is it more important for atheists to fight against the backwards words and actions of the religious right? And I need to cut in once more to flag John for another false dichotomy. Again, no need for an or there. So yes, I would still berate them for that. And yes, it's more important to fight against the more actively bigoted and society-impairing aspects of religion. Now, we're going to come back to this, but obviously we can all agree that one's ire shouldn't be reserved for, only the most problematic issue in society, but rather one's ire should be proportional to those issues. So yes, if theists were just Bigfoot hunters, I would spend significantly less of my time and energy pushing back against them. Bigfoot hunters are basically harmless, but I'd still berate them. Again, we're going to circle back to all of this, but I want to finish John's email here. So he continues. "I bring this up because I was raised Catholic, but my pastor growing up always preached about the loving nature of Jesus and how we should care about one another more than strictly adhering to the letter of the Bible and hating fags and going to hell and whatnot. And then he sent a portion of the money that he collected to silence child rape victims and shield their abusers from justice." John didn't point that out. I just thought it was worth adding. Anyway, he continues. "Plus, my mom was very adamant about science and religion not being mutually exclusive, that evolution and the Big Bang don't disprove the existence of God, and one can adhere to both." Okay, so your mom's wrong, but that's cool. But she probably didn't know it. Sorry that I'm not willing to grant her too many points for admitting that demonstrably true stuff happened and then falsely claiming that it didn't conflict with bullshit stories about angels and dragons. Again, we'll circle back. And finally, John adds, "At this point, I tend to call myself an agnostic, but mainly because I don't give a shit about whether or not there is a god or many gods or flying spaghetti monsters or Cthulhu or anything. I also don't really care what other people believe as long as it's not hurtful to anyone else." And then he goes on to say some very nice stuff about the work we do, which was very nice of him, but not really germane to the discussion at hand. And I should note that I get an email asking some variation of this question at least once a week at this point. And John's was just a little better thought out than many versions of it. But the question always boils down to this. If religion was harmless, would it still bother you? Of course, the problem with this question is that we've moved so far into hypothetical land that I can't even imagine what that world would look like, right? I mean, as near as I can tell, the only way a religion can be harmless is if it's true. And obviously, I wouldn't berate the Catholics for their beliefs if those beliefs were correct, but promoting an untrue worldview is never harmless, and suggesting that faith is a reasonable means of obtaining truth cannot be constrained. Let's look a little deeper at John's example about his mom, right? His mom told him that you can believe in God and evolution, and while that might be conciliatory, it's incorrect. And if you understand evolution, you already know why. There's simply no room for God. To say that God guided evolution is to completely misunderstand the entire concept of natural selection, or else to put humankind outside of it altogether. So at best, if you want to cling to your concept of God, you can only dig so deep into evolution before you have to start compartmentalizing. Is this as bad as promoting bigotry? Of course not. But promoting bigotry isn't as bad as raping puppies, and nobody would ever ask me to back off the bigots because of that. But the real problem I have with this notion of benign religion is that it belies the actual problem. The actual problem isn't the bigotry or the sexism or the anti-intellectualism or even the child rape. The problem is religion. The problem is codifying a separate set of viewpoints that aren't subject to empirical disconfirmation, and there's no way to do that without inviting in the crazy people. Religions, in their broadest sense, are the vehicles societies have created to get people to do things that aren't in their best interest. That's what they're designed to do. And the idea that a religion is going to exist without doing that is too utopian to realistically consider. I mean, if all you ever did with your gun is open stubborn ketchup bottles, that doesn't make guns any less dangerous. In fact, in many ways, the liberal theologist is actually more dangerous because they provide the fundamentalists with the cover, funding, and social clout that they would never be able to achieve if we just had the wackos. And without that, the wackos would be essentially powerless, right? The massive number of people who turn a blind eye to the weaponized institution is the only reason the worst among the religionists are able to find any traction at all. The vast majority of Christians aren't racist or misogynist or homophobic or anti-intellectual, and they're not fully convinced that Jesus Christ is going to return to earth to save the good guys in the next couple of years. And yet the clout that the majority lends to the fundamentalists ends up allowing those fundies to draft policy, to take over school boards, to lobby Congress, to influence foreign policy. So, you give your money to your liberal Catholic, let's all just get along priest. It goes up the chain of command, and before you know it, you're directly funding anti-marriage equality legislation in Slovenia or something. So with apologies for oversimplifying your point a bit, John, but all religion and all institutionalized bullshit for that matter is fully deserving of our ire, our vitriol, and our vehement objection. Because in the real world, there is no right way to be wrong.